The hall was filled with the soft hum of chatter and the clinking of glasses. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, glowing warmly over rows of polished seats. It was the annual City Music Gala, a night where the most talented musicians, critics, and sponsors gathered to celebrate the art of piano. Everything about the event screamed elegance. Every corner was decorated with roses and velvet ribbons, and the faint sound of classical pieces played in the background. At the front of the hall stood a grand piano, gleaming under the golden light. The audience waited eagerly for the night's most anticipated performer, a man who had become the face of modern piano. His name was Leonard, and everyone knew him not just for his skill but for his pride. He walked with his chin slightly raised as if the air around him belonged to someone of higher birth. People whispered that he was brilliant, yes, but impossible to please. When Leonard stepped onto the stage, the crowd broke into applause. He smiled, but it wasn't a humble smile. It was the kind that said, "I know I'm the best." He bowed slightly, adjusted his cufflinks, and then turned to the host. "Tonight," the host announced, "we have a special open stage segment. If anyone from the audience wishes to play, this is your moment." Everyone chuckled politely. No one dared to step forward. Who would play after a pianist like Leonard? Then from the back row a quiet voice spoke up. "I'd like to try." Heads turned. A woman stood up, simple clothes, gentle face, hands folded nervously in front of her. She looked out of place in the room full of shining dresses and sharp tuxedos. A few people stared, puzzled. Others smiled kindly, thinking she must be a local amateur. Leonard, still standing near the piano, raised an eyebrow. "You?" he said, just loud enough for the people nearby to hear. "You want to play here?" She nodded softly. "If that's all right." The host hesitated. "Of course, miss. Music is for everyone," he said, though even his tone carried surprise. Leonard leaned toward the microphone. "Well then," he said, half smiling, "perhaps we can make it interesting. How about a little duel?" The audience murmured in excitement. A duel, that was new. Leonard loved showing off his skill. And what better way to do that than to challenge a stranger? The woman looked at him calmly. "A duel?" she repeated, her voice soft. "Yes," Leonard replied. "You play a piece. I'll play mine. The audience can decide who touched their hearts more." His tone was teasing, not cruel, but everyone could hear the arrogance behind it. She thought for a moment, and then nodded. "All right." The audience clapped and laughed lightly. No one expected her to win. In their minds, this was just a bit of harmless fun. A proud man testing his ego on someone harmless. But as she walked toward the stage, there was something different about her step. It wasn't nervous or shy. It was quiet, graceful, and steady. Leonard took the first turn as always. He sat at the piano and took a dramatic breath, his fingers poised over the keys. The moment he started playing, the hall filled with fast, sharp notes that bounced through the air like firecrackers. His technique was flawless, every movement of his hands precise, confident, and powerful. The piece was full of energy, almost aggressive in its beauty. People clapped along quietly, some closing their eyes, others tapping their fingers on their knees. Leonard played not for emotion, but for dominance. When he finished, he stood up, letting the applause wash over him. He bowed deeply, soaking in the admiration. Then he looked toward the woman. "Your turn," he said smoothly. She stepped forward, her shoes making soft sounds on the wooden floor. She didn't bow or smile. She simply placed her hands on the piano and sat still for a moment. The hall grew quiet. Some whispered, "She looks so unsure." Others sighed, thinking this would be awkward. Leonard leaned on the piano, crossing his arms, expecting a slow, hesitant performance, but then she played one soft note. Just one. It was gentle, almost fragile, yet it filled the room with a warmth no one expected. Then came another and another, slow, thoughtful, like a story being told by the heart instead of the hands. The audience fell silent. Every sound in the hall disappeared. Her melody floated like a calm river, each note flowing perfectly into the next. It wasn't about showing skill. It was about emotion, pure human emotion. For the first time that night, Leonard stopped smiling. His expression slowly shifted from amusement to curiosity. He had heard thousands of pianists in his career, but this was different. Her fingers moved effortlessly across the keys, not rushing, not hesitating, just speaking in a language that everyone could understand. Her eyes were closed, and it was as if she wasn't playing the piano but playing life itself. A woman in the front row dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Someone in the back sighed deeply, lost in the music. When she finished, the last note hung in the air for several seconds before fading away. Then came silence. Not the polite silence of expectation, but a deep emotional stillness that no one wanted to break. Finally, someone started clapping. Then another. And suddenly the whole hall erupted into applause. People stood up cheering. Some whistled, some cried. The sound was deafening. The woman stood up slowly, bowed once, and stepped away from the piano. Her face was calm, almost shy. Leonard remained where he was, frozen. The applause wasn't for him anymore. He felt something he hadn't felt in years: humility. The host, clearly amazed, tried to speak over the noise. What a performance. Incredible. Miss, may I ask your name? She hesitated, looking uncomfortable with the attention. Just Alina, she said softly. The crowd cheered again. Some people rushed forward to shake her hand. Others took pictures. Leonard stepped back quietly, his confidence shaken. He had spent years mastering the piano, memorizing techniques and perfecting his showmanship. But this woman, this simple, humble woman, had just reminded everyone that music wasn't about perfection. It was about feeling. As the audience surrounded her, Leonard turned away and walked backstage. He didn't say a word. For the first time, the applause felt painful. Behind the curtain, he sat down, running a hand through his hair. He could still hear the echo of her music in his mind. It was haunting, beautiful, and pure. He tried to analyze it, to understand how she did it, but he couldn't, because what she played couldn't be explained by technique. It came from somewhere deeper. Meanwhile, Alina quietly left the stage after thanking the host. She didn't stay for interviews or photos. She simply walked out of the hall, slipping into the cool night air. Outside, the city lights glowed softly against the dark sky. She smiled faintly, almost to herself, and whispered, "It feels good to play again." Then she walked away into the night, leaving behind a room full of people who would remember her forever. Back inside, the event continued, but the energy had changed. The guests no longer talked about fame or competition. Instead, they spoke about emotion, humility, and how a simple woman had moved them more than any professional performance could. Leonard didn't play again that night. He stayed in his seat thinking. For years he had believed he played the piano better than anyone else. But now he wasn't so sure. He realized that while he had mastered the instrument, he had forgotten to master the heart. The music she played replayed in his head again and again. The notes weren't just sounds, they were lessons. Lessons about humanity, grace, and the quiet power of truth. When the gala ended and the crowd began to leave, Leonard stepped out to the empty stage once more. He placed his hands on the piano and played a few soft notes, trying to recapture what she had done. But no matter how hard he tried, the sound didn't carry the same warmth. He sighed deeply, whispering to himself, "What did she have that I don't?" The answer, of course, was something he couldn't learn from books or rehearsals. It was something only life could teach, and though he didn't know it yet, this single night, the night he mocked a simple woman, would change his life forever. The morning after the gala, the city was still buzzing with whispers about what had happened. Videos of the mysterious woman's performance had spread across social media overnight. People were calling her the hidden master and the woman who silenced the hall. Clips of her playing were everywhere. The comments were full of people saying they had cried listening to her music. Some wondered who she was. Others said she should be invited to international competitions. But no one really knew her name. Alina, however, had no idea about any of that. She was already awake, preparing breakfast in her small apartment. The sound of a kettle whistling filled the kitchen. Her life was simple. Her days were quiet. She taught piano lessons at a small community center a few blocks away. Most of her students were children from local families, kids who came after school to learn the basics of music. She loved teaching them. Watching their little hands press the keys and seeing their smiles when they got a note right always reminded her why she loved music in the first place. That morning, as she walked to the center with her worn-out satchel and a thermos of tea, she didn't think much about the night before. To her, it was just a moment, a chance to play again after many years. She didn't do it to impress anyone. She simply felt that it was time to share her music again, even if only for a few minutes. When she entered the center, the children greeted her with laughter and excitement. "Miss Elena, we saw you on the internet," one of them said, waving a phone. She smiled, surprised. "You did?" "Yes," another said. "You played at the big concert. Everyone's talking about you." She blushed and tried to laugh it off. "Ah, that's just something small. Now let's focus on your scales," she said softly. But inside, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. A quiet warmth. Across the city, however, Leonard's day was very different. He had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard that melody again. The simplicity of it, the emotion, it haunted him. He sat by his piano trying to play something similar, but every note he touched sounded cold, mechanical. He had been praised all his life for perfection, yet now perfection felt meaningless. His mind kept replaying her calm expression, the way she didn't seek attention, the way her music spoke without words. He turned on his phone and scrolled through the videos of the event. Every clip showed her. The comments underneath were harsh toward him, people mocking his arrogance, calling him out for challenging someone so pure-hearted. He threw the phone aside and sighed. It wasn't the criticism that hurt, it was the truth behind it. For years he had treated music as a weapon to prove superiority, not as a language of the soul. By noon, he made a decision. He wanted to find her, not to challenge her again, but to understand. It took him 2 days of searching. He contacted the event organizer, who remembered her first name. With that, he traced her to the small community center. When he arrived, the place was noisy with laughter and piano sounds. Children's voices echoed down the hallway. He paused at the doorway, watching through the small glass window. There she was, sitting beside a small upright piano, guiding a little boy through a simple melody. She smiled patiently, her voice gentle and encouraging. Her posture was relaxed and her hands rested lightly on the keys as she showed him how to move his fingers. Leonard felt an unfamiliar heaviness in his chest. It wasn't pride. It wasn't envy. It was humility. For the first time, he realized what true mastery looked like. It wasn't about applause or fame. It was about giving. He didn't enter right away. He stood there for a while, just listening. The room smelled faintly of chalk and wood polish. The laughter of the children mixed with the sound of beginner notes, off-key, clumsy, yet full of life. When the lesson ended and the children ran out, Elena noticed someone at the door. She looked up and froze for a second when she saw who it was. Leonard stepped inside quietly. "I hope I'm not disturbing," he said softly. She smiled politely. "Not at all." "You're from the gala," he nodded. "Yes, I wanted to talk to you." She gestured toward a chair. "Please sit." He sat down, feeling awkward. For someone used to grand stages and spotlights, this small, warm room felt completely foreign. "I watched your performance again," he began. "I wanted to understand how you did it. The way you played, it wasn't just skill. It was something else. Something I've been missing." Elena looked at him quietly. "I didn't play to win," she said. "I just played what I felt." "I know," he said. "That's exactly it. I've spent my whole life chasing perfection. I never realized I'd lost the feeling along the way." She gave a small smile. "It happens. Sometimes we try so hard to be the best that we forget why we started." Her words hit him deeply. He looked around the room. On the wall were children's drawings of pianos, music notes, and stick figures smiling. A few photos showed Elena with her students at small community recitals. There was no sign of fame here, just love for the art. He asked gently, "Why don't you perform anymore? With your talent, you could be on any stage in the world." Her eyes softened. "I used to," she said quietly, "many years ago. But life, it changed. I lost someone who meant everything to me. After that, I couldn't play for crowds anymore. It felt empty." Leonard nodded slowly. He didn't push further. He could see the sadness in her eyes, but also peace, like someone who had accepted pain and turned it into wisdom. She continued, "I found meaning again when I started teaching children. They remind me of what music is really for. It's not to prove who's better. It's to connect, to make someone feel something real." Her words were simple, but they went straight to his heart. After a long pause, Leonard asked, "Would you teach me?" She looked surprised. "Teach you?" He smiled faintly. "Yes, I want to learn to play like that again, not with pride, but with feeling." Elena chuckled softly. "You already know how to play, Leonard. You just need to listen to yourself. He thought about that. Maybe she was right. Maybe what he needed wasn't more training, but more truth. They spent the next hour talking about music, about life, about what it means to create something honest. For the first time in years, Leonard felt free. There was no pressure, no competition. Just two people sharing their love for sound. When he left, he thanked her sincerely. "You've reminded me of something I lost," he said. She nodded gently. Then maybe the duel was worth it after all. He smiled, bowed slightly, and walked out into the afternoon light. The air felt different, lighter somehow. As he walked through the busy street, he passed a small park where a young boy was playing an old keyboard. The tune was uneven but full of enthusiasm. Leonard stopped, listened, and then dropped a coin into the boy's open case. "Keep playing," he said softly. "You sound alive." The boy grinned. "Thanks, mister." That night, Leonard returned home and sat at his grand piano. But this time, he didn't pick a complicated piece. He just started playing whatever came to his mind. The melody was simple and imperfect, but it carried something real. As he played, he thought about Alina, the way her hands had moved, the way her music had touched hearts. He realized that her gift wasn't just skill. It was honesty. For the first time, he played without worrying about being perfect. He just played. The sound filled his empty apartment, soft and warm. It felt like breathing again after holding his breath for years. And somewhere across town in her small apartment, Alina sat by her window, sipping tea. She could faintly hear music drifting from a distance, a melody that sounded familiar, full of life and emotion. She smiled to herself, knowing that perhaps at last, someone had learned the real language of the piano. The days passed quietly after Leonard's visit to the community center. The small classroom was once again filled with the usual rhythm of children's laughter and off-key piano notes. Life returned to its calm routine for Alina, though something inside her had shifted slightly. Meeting Leonard again had stirred old memories she thought she had buried long ago. In the evenings, after her lessons ended and the children went home, she sometimes stayed behind to play alone. The building would be silent except for her soft music floating through the halls. The caretaker often stopped his sweeping just to listen for a few minutes, standing by the door with a gentle smile. Her music had that effect. It calmed even the busiest souls, but even though she smiled and taught as always, a part of her was remembering. The faces from her past, the long hours she had once spent practicing in grand halls, the competitions, the pressure, and the one person who had believed in her more than anyone else, her mentor, the man who had taught her not just how to play, but how to feel through music. When he passed away years ago, she couldn't bring herself to perform again. The piano had become a painful reminder of loss. But that night at the gala, something changed. Playing again had felt freeing. It was as if her mentor's spirit had been sitting beside her, whispering, "This is what you were meant to do." Meanwhile, Leonard had been keeping his promise to himself. Every morning he sat by his piano and practiced, not scales or complicated etudes, but simple emotional pieces. He stopped caring about applause, about being perfect. Instead, he started listening to his own feelings, letting them guide his hands. But something still felt missing. He needed to understand how Alina could make music that spoke straight to the heart. So one afternoon, he returned to the community center. This time, he didn't wear his usual fancy suit. He dressed simply, blending in with the other teachers and parents waiting outside. When Alina saw him standing at the doorway, she smiled. "You're back," he nodded. "If you don't mind, I'd like to watch your class again. I think I can learn more from how you teach than from any book." She chuckled lightly. "You're welcome to stay, but I warn you, my students aren't as patient as critics. They'll tell you straight if you play badly." He grinned. "I think I need that honesty." That day, he sat quietly at the back as she taught. The children gathered around the piano, their laughter filling the small room. Alina explained things in such a gentle way, comparing music to nature, to emotions, to memories. When you press a key, she told them, you're not just making a sound. You're telling a story. Every sound is a word. Every pause is a breath. Leonard watched, amazed. He had studied under great masters, but none had ever spoken about music like this. After the class ended, one of the children tugged at Leonard's sleeve. "Are you a pianist too?" the little girl asked curiously. He smiled. "I used to think so." The girl tilted her head. You don't think so anymore? He hesitated, then said softly, "Not in the way that really matters." Alina overheard and smiled quietly. As the weeks went by, Leonard became a regular visitor. Sometimes he helped tune the pianos. Sometimes he played small duets with the children, laughing when they missed notes. For the first time in years, he felt joy in sharing music, not just performing it. One evening after the students had left, Alina and Leonard sat by the piano as the sun dipped low outside the window. The orange light reflected off the keys, giving them a warm glow. Leonard turned to her. "Can I ask you something personal?" She nodded. "Why did you really stop performing?" She looked down at the keys, her fingers tracing them slowly. "When I was younger, I wanted to be perfect," she began. "I practiced until my hands hurt. My mentor used to tell me, perfection is not music, it's prison." I didn't understand what he meant back then. I thought he wanted me to slow down. But after he died, I finally understood. Her voice softened. I realized that music isn't about how fast or flawless you play. It's about connection. But by then I was too tired to keep chasing the stage. I wanted to live quietly, to find peace again. Leonard listened silently. Every word she said echoed something inside him. After a long pause, he said, "You know, I've been thinking about organizing a charity concert for children who can't afford instruments. Maybe the community center could use it to get new pianos. Would you help me?" Alina looked surprised. "Me on stage again?" He smiled gently. "Not to compete. To share." She hesitated, her eyes distant. The idea of returning to a stage brought back a mix of excitement and fear. But when she looked at the old piano in front of her, scratched and worn yet full of life, she felt a spark. "All right," she said softly. "But only if we play together." Leonard grinned. "Deal." For the next few weeks they prepared side by side. Sometimes they practiced late into the evening, taking breaks to talk about old performances, favorite composers, and the lessons life had taught them. Leonard noticed that Alina never rushed. She took time with every piece, letting silence fill the space between notes. The day of the concert arrived quietly. It wasn't held in a grand hall this time, but in the same community center where she taught. The children had decorated the stage with paper stars and flowers. The audience was made up of families, neighbors, and local shopkeepers. It was small, but warm and full of heart. Leonard, standing backstage, felt something he hadn't felt in years, nervousness, but not from fear. It was the kind that came before something meaningful. Alina walked in wearing a simple white dress. She looked calm, at peace. When their eyes met, she smiled. "Ready?" He nodded. More than ever, they stepped onto the stage together. The room went quiet. The old piano sat in the center, its surface polished as best as the children could manage. Leonard began the first piece, soft, flowing, gentle. Alina joined in a moment later, her melody weaving around his like sunlight on water. The two sounds blended perfectly, filling the small hall with warmth. The audience sat completely still, their eyes glistening. Some of the children leaned forward, amazed to see their teacher play like that. As the final notes faded, there was silence for a few seconds, then applause. Loud, joyful, sincere. Alina smiled, looking at the children cheering in the front row. Leonard looked at her, and for the first time he didn't feel envy or pride, only gratitude. After the concert, people came up to thank them. A mother said, "My daughter wants to learn piano now because of you." Another whispered, "That was the most beautiful thing I've heard in years." Later, when everyone had left and the hall was empty again, Alina sat at the piano, running her hand along the keys. "It feels strange," she said softly. "After all this time." Being back on stage, Leonard sat beside her. "It suited you," he said. "You looked like you belonged there," she chuckled. "Maybe. But I think I belong here more, with the children, with quiet moments." He nodded, understanding completely. Outside, the night was peaceful. Through the window, they could see the stars scattered across the sky. For a moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the city and the echo of the music still lingering in the air. Finally, Leonard said, "You know, I used to think music was about reaching the top, but you've shown me it's really about reaching people." Alina turned to him and smiled gently. That's all it ever was. And in that moment, sitting side by side at the old piano, both of them felt something they hadn't felt in years, a deep, quiet happiness. The world outside didn't know it yet, but that little concert at a small community center had started something far greater than fame. It had reminded everyone who was there that music, real music, comes not from pride but from love. The morning after the concert, sunlight poured through the small windows of the community center. The air was still full of warmth and excitement from the night before. The children were the first to arrive that day, running inside with wide smiles. They couldn't stop talking about how their teacher had played with the famous pianist. Elena stood by the piano, tuning it slowly as they spoke. Her heart was calm, but there was a quiet joy inside her that she hadn't felt in years. For so long, she had taught in silence, keeping her music private. But now, after sharing the stage again, she realized something had shifted within her. Music didn't hurt anymore, it healed. One of the children ran up to her holding a small drawing. It showed two people sitting at a piano with a crowd around them. "It's you and the man from the concert," the little girl said proudly. Elena smiled and bent down to take it. "It's beautiful. I'll keep it forever." As the day went on, she noticed that something had changed in the way her students played. Their notes were more thoughtful, their faces more focused. The concert had inspired them. They had seen that music could move hearts, not just entertain. Later that afternoon, as the last student left, she sat alone at the piano again. She began to play softly, her fingers gliding naturally over the keys. The melody that came out wasn't planned, it was pure emotion shaped by gratitude. Halfway through the song, she heard the door open quietly. She looked up and saw Leonard standing there holding a folder in his hand. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said. She smiled. "You never interrupt music." He stepped closer. "I came to give you something." He handed her the folder. Inside were photographs from the concert, taken by the event's photographer. In each picture, she was completely lost in the music, her eyes closed, her hands dancing over the piano. Elena's eyes softened. "These are lovely. Thank you." "There's something else too," he said. "An invitation." She looked at him curiously. "I've been asked to perform at a charity event in the city next month," he explained. "They saw videos of our concert here. They want us both to perform together." Elena hesitated. "I'm not sure I want to perform on big stages again." He nodded gently. "I understand. But this isn't like before. There's no competition, no pressure. It's a fundraiser for children who can't afford instruments. You inspired this whole idea, Elena. Without you, it wouldn't exist." She looked down at the piano keys, thinking. Her fingers rested on the wood as if asking for guidance. She remembered her mentor's words, "Music is a gift. Don't hide it." Finally, she looked up and smiled faintly. "All right," she said softly. "I'll do it. But promise me something." "Anything," Leonard said. "Promise me that this won't be about fame or showing off. Promise me it will only be about the music." He placed his hand over his heart. "I promise." Over the next few weeks, they practiced together again, just as before. But this time, their bond was stronger. They didn't just play notes, they shared stories, laughter, and small moments that made the music feel alive. Sometimes while taking a break, Elena would tell him about her old mentor, how he used to tap her shoulder when she got too caught up in perfection, reminding her to breathe between notes. Leonard listened carefully, realizing he had spent years chasing something that could only be found in silence. As the day of the charity event drew closer, the city buzzed with anticipation. Posters went up around town, showing their names side by side. People remembered the viral story from the gala, the arrogant pianist who challenged a humble woman and lost, and they were eager to see them perform together again. But this time, there was no arrogance, no pride. Leonard had changed. His friends noticed it too. He spoke more softly now, smiled more, and even started giving free lessons to children in his spare time. It was as if Elena's humility had washed away the walls he'd built around himself. The night before the performance, Elena couldn't sleep. She sat by her window looking out at the quiet street. The moonlight fell softly across her room, touching the piano in the corner. She walked over and sat down, her hands resting gently on the keys. She played the first few notes of a song she hadn't played since her mentor's funeral. It was his favorite piece, a slow, emotional melody full of longing and peace. As she played, tears filled her eyes, not from sadness but from gratitude. She whispered softly, "You were right. Music always finds its way back." The next evening, the theater was full. Families, teachers, musicians, and even children from her community center filled the seats. The stage lights glowed warmly, and at the center stood a grand piano. Backstage, Leonard turned to Elena. "Are you nervous?" She smiled calmly. "No, I'm grateful." When they walked out together, the crowd erupted in applause. The sight of them side by side brought a wave of emotion to everyone who remembered their story. Leonard began the first piece, a duet they had practiced for weeks. It started soft, tender, and slow. Elena joined in seamlessly, their melodies intertwining like two stories finally meeting in harmony. The sound filled the theater, pure and moving. People sat completely still, afraid to even breathe too loudly. Each note carried emotion, each pause carried meaning. It wasn't just music. It was forgiveness, humility, and rebirth woven together. As they reached the final notes, the sound faded slowly into silence. Then the applause came, loud, thunderous, and full of admiration. But this time Leonard didn't bow with pride. He stepped back, gesturing toward Elena, letting her take the applause. She smiled shyly and gave a small bow. When they left the stage, Leonard turned to her and said, "That was the most honest music I've ever played." Elena nodded. "That's because it came from truth." After the concert, people gathered around them. Reporters asked questions, but Leonard refused to talk about rivalry or fame. He simply said, "We play to give, not to prove." A few days later, the charity announced that the concert had raised enough money to buy new instruments for schools across the city. The news spread quickly, and the story of their partnership touched hearts everywhere. One evening, Leonard visited the community center again. The children were unpacking shiny new keyboards, their faces glowing with joy. When they saw him, they ran up, thanking him for the instruments. But he pointed to Elena. "Thank her," he said. "She's the reason music reached you." Elena laughed, shaking her head. "No, thank all of you. You remind us why music matters." That night, after everyone left, Leonard lingered a little longer. He turned to Elena and said quietly, "You know, I used to think losing a competition was the worst thing that could happen to me. But losing to you was the best thing that ever did." She smiled gently. "You didn't lose, Leonard. You just found something more important." He nodded, understanding. The rivalry that had once started in pride had ended in friendship and in purpose. As they stood there in the quiet room, surrounded by pianos and children's laughter echoing faintly from the hallway, Elena played a few soft notes. Leonard joined in, and once again their melodies met in perfect harmony. The sound was warm, full of peace. No audience, no cameras, just two souls who had learned that the greatest music isn't made on grand stages, but in the hearts of those who play for love. Outside, the evening wind carried the faint sound of their piano through the streets. People passing by paused for a moment, listening without knowing who played. They smiled, moved by something they couldn't quite explain, and in that quiet, gentle moment, both Elena and Leonard knew that music had given them something far greater than applause. It had given them peace, friendship, and a purpose that would never fade. The months that followed were peaceful but full of change. The small community center where Elena taught began to grow in ways no one expected. After the charity concert, donations started coming in from people across the city. Some sent money, others sent instruments, and a few even came to volunteer. The room that once held one old piano now had 5, and every corner was filled with the sound of children learning, laughing, and sometimes arguing about who would play next. Elena felt proud every time she walked into that room. For years, she had carried a quiet sadness about the past, believing her music was something that belonged only to yesterday. But now, when she saw the children's bright faces, she realized her gift had found its home. One evening, as she locked up the center, she noticed a letter slipped under the door. The paper was thick with an elegant logo printed on the top. Curious, she opened it. It was from the National Conservatory of Music, the same institution she had once dreamed of attending when she was young. The letter invited her to give a guest lecture and performance as part of their annual masterclass series. Her hands trembled slightly as she read it. The same halls that once felt unreachable were now asking for her. It felt surreal. That night she sat by her piano at home, lost in thought. The idea of returning to that world frightened her a little. It was the world she had once left behind, competitive, polished, full of people who believed perfection mattered more than emotion. But deep down, she knew this was something she had to face. A few days later, she met Leonard again for coffee near the park. He looked rested, calm, and lighter than before. "They invited you too?" he asked, smiling. She nodded. "You knew?" "They told me they wanted us to perform together again. This time as equals." Elena hesitated. "I'm not sure I belong in that kind of place anymore. I'm happy teaching here." He leaned forward gently. "Elena, you don't have to go back for them. Go for the students. They need to see what's possible. And maybe," he said softly, "so do you." His words stayed with her long after he left. When the day of the masterclass arrived, the conservatory looked just as she remembered from her youth. Tall pillars, golden lights, marble floors that echoed every footstep. She felt like a student again walking through those doors. The hall was filled with students from all over the country, waiting to hear the two pianists whose unexpected story had captured hearts everywhere. When Elena walked in, some of them whispered excitedly. Many already knew her story, the humble teacher who had once been underestimated by a famous musician. As the session began, Leonard spoke first. He shared his journey openly, admitting his mistakes and how pride had blinded him. He told them that true mastery had nothing to do with speed or fame. It came from honesty, humility, and connection. Then Elena was invited to speak. She stood quietly for a moment before saying, "I stopped playing for many years, not because I couldn't, but because I forgot why I should. I thought music was meant to impress people. But now I know it's meant to reach people." The room fell silent. Her voice was calm, but every word carried meaning. After the talk, she was asked to perform. She sat at the grand piano on the stage, the same kind of instrument she had once feared. For a moment, her fingers hovered over the keys. She closed her eyes and took a slow breath. Then she began to play. The melody she chose wasn't something complicated or famous. It was a piece she had written herself, soft, gentle, full of quiet emotion. As she played, the hall grew still. Every note carried a story of loss, rediscovery, and forgiveness. When the final chord faded, no one moved for a few seconds. Then the applause came, long and heartfelt. Some students even stood up, clapping with shining eyes. Leonard joined her on stage, and together, they played a duet that made the moment complete. Their music wasn't loud or showy. It was honest. Afterward, many students came forward to thank her. Some said her words gave them courage to play from their hearts instead of trying to be perfect. Later, as they walked out into the courtyard, Leonard looked at her and said, "You've changed the way they see music." She smiled softly. "No, they changed me. I used to think I had nothing left to give. But I see now, sharing music doesn't empty you, it fills you." In the weeks that followed, Elena continued teaching, but things were different now. Invitations began arriving from other schools and small concert halls. Everyone wanted her to play or speak. She didn't say yes to everything. She chose carefully, only accepting the ones that had meaning, especially events for young musicians or underprivileged children. Leonard often joined her. Sometimes they played duets, other times they taught together. Over time, their partnership grew into something more than professional. It was a quiet, unspoken friendship built on mutual respect. They didn't need to talk much when they were around each other. Music had become their language. One day, a small boy from Elena's class came to her with a nervous look. "Teacher, can you listen to this?" he asked, holding his tiny hands above the keys. He played slowly, missing a few notes, but his face was full of focus. When he finished, he looked up anxiously. "It's not perfect," Elena smiled warmly. "It doesn't have to be perfect. Tell me, how did it make you feel?" He thought for a moment and said, "Happy." "Then you did it right," she said softly. That moment reminded her of her own journey. She realized that perfection had stolen her joy once, but she would never let it steal theirs. Months later, as spring came, Leonard announced he was leaving for a while. "I've been offered a teaching position in Vienna," he told her. "It's temporary, but I think I need to take it. I want to pass on what I've learned." Elena nodded, her eyes gentle. "You should go. Those students will be lucky to have you." He smiled. "I'll be back. And when I return, I expect a full concert from your students." She laughed softly. "You'll get one." Before he left, he handed her a small music book. "It's something I've been writing," he said. A collection of pieces inspired by everything we've shared. She opened it. The first page had a title written in delicate handwriting, Harmony of the Heart. When he was gone, Elina continued her work, pouring her energy into the children, the music, and the quiet little miracles that filled each day. But sometimes, when the evenings were calm and the sun dipped below the horizon, she would sit by the piano, open the book he had given her, and play the first song. It was beautiful, gentle, emotional, and full of warmth. Each note felt like a memory, a reflection of their friendship, their lessons, and how far they had both come. As time passed, she became known not just as a pianist, but as someone who changed the meaning of music for everyone she met. But she never chased recognition. For her, the greatest reward was seeing a child's eyes light up when they played their first song, or watching a shy student find courage behind the keys. Years later, when Leonard returned, the community center was filled with new faces and more pianos than he remembered. He stood at the door for a moment, smiling as he heard the familiar sound of children practicing. Elina looked up and saw him, her eyes bright with surprise. "You're back. I told you I would be," he said. "And I'm ready for that concert." She laughed softly. "Then let's begin." That evening, the students gathered around as Elina and Leonard played side by side again. The music that filled the room wasn't grand or dramatic, it was warm and full of life. The children watched in awe, realizing they were witnessing something special. Two people who had once been rivals now creating beauty together. And when the last note faded, there was a silence so deep that it felt sacred. Then the children began to clap, some even cheering. Elina looked at Leonard and said quietly, "Music brought us here, and it will keep going long after us." He nodded. "That's how it should be." Outside, the sky turned golden with the setting sun. Through the open window, their music drifted into the evening air, touching the hearts of anyone who happened to pass by, just like it always had. And in that simple, peaceful moment, both of them knew this was not the end of their story, but the start of something that would live on through every note, every child, and every heart their music had touched. The years rolled by gently, like soft music flowing through time. The little community center that once had one worn-out piano had now become a place people from all around came to see. Its walls echoed not only with music but with laughter, hope, and stories. Elina still taught there, her hair now streaked with silver, her movements slower but filled with the same gentle patience. Every morning she arrived early to open the windows, letting in the sunlight and the sounds of the waking town. The children came soon after, rushing in with their backpacks and excitement. She always began the day the same way, by sitting at the piano and playing a few soft notes. The children would fall silent, listening to the familiar melody that had become part of their mornings. It wasn't a lesson. It was a reminder that music wasn't about rushing or proving anything. It was about feeling. One morning as she played, she noticed a young boy standing by the door. He wasn't one of her regular students. His clothes were simple, his shoes a little worn, but his eyes were bright, full of curiosity. "Would you like to come in?" she asked kindly. He nodded shyly. "I heard the piano from outside. I've never seen one up close," she smiled. "Then come closer. Do you want to try?" He hesitated. "I don't know how." "That's the best place to start," she said softly, patting the bench beside her. He sat down carefully, his small hands trembling a little. She placed his fingers on the keys and said, "These are not just notes. They're like voices. Each one has a story. Try pressing one." He pressed a single note and the sound filled the room, simple and clear. His face lit up as if he had just discovered something magical. "That's it," she said warmly. "That's music." From that day on, the boy began coming every afternoon. He practiced slowly, sometimes getting frustrated, but Elina never raised her voice. She guided him the same way she guided everyone, patiently letting him find his own rhythm. Over time, his confidence grew. The other children liked him, and soon he became part of their small musical family. One day, while he was practicing, Leonard walked into the center again. He looked almost the same, calm, composed, though his hair had a few silver strands now too. "Elina," he called softly. She turned, surprised and happy. "Leonard!" "You came back again." "I told you this place would keep calling me," he said, smiling. He watched as the children practiced, the room full of life. "You've built something beautiful here," he said quietly. Elena looked around, her eyes soft. We built it together. You helped more than you know. They sat together watching the young boy play. Leonard noticed the way the child's fingers moved. Not perfect, but full of emotion. He reminds me of someone, he said. Who? She asked. You, Leonard said simply. The way he listens to every note, Elena smiled. He listens because he feels. That's how music should be. A few weeks later, the town announced a small festival to celebrate local talent. The community center was asked to perform as part of it. The children were thrilled, especially the new boy. But Elena noticed he looked nervous one evening as they practiced. What's wrong? She asked. He hesitated before whispering, What if I make mistakes? She smiled gently. Everyone makes mistakes, even the best pianist. But do you know what matters most? He shook his head. That you play with heart. If you do that, no one will remember the wrong notes. Her words comforted him, and he nodded. When the day of the festival arrived, the whole town gathered in the open square. Families, neighbors, and visitors filled the seats. The stage was decorated with flowers, and in the center stood a simple upright piano from the community center. Elena sat backstage, helping the children get ready. Leonard stood beside her, quietly watching the excitement. When it was time, the children walked onto the stage one by one. Their faces glowed in the warm afternoon light. The little boy went last. His heart raced as he sat at the piano, his hands shaking slightly. From the side of the stage, Elena gave him an encouraging smile. Just play what you feel, she mouthed silently. He took a deep breath and began. At first, his notes were uncertain, but as he went on, his hands grew steadier. The melody floated gently across the square, simple and pure. People in the crowd began to smile. Some even closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. When he finished, the applause came, soft at first, then louder. The boy looked out, his eyes wide with disbelief. He had done it. Elena felt tears prick her eyes as she clapped proudly. Leonard looked at her and said quietly, He's the future. After the performance, the boy ran to Elena, his face glowing. I didn't think I could do it, he said breathlessly. She smiled warmly. You didn't just play notes. You told a story. That's what music is all about. Later that evening, when the festival was over and everyone had gone home, Elena and Leonard stayed behind for a while. The square was quiet now, lit only by the soft glow of the streetlights. Leonard sat at the piano and played a slow, tender melody. Elena joined him, and together they played as the night breeze carried their notes into the sky. When they finished, Leonard looked at her. Do you ever think about how it all started? He asked. She nodded, smiling. I do. It began with pride and ended with peace. He chuckled softly. And it taught me more than all my years of training ever could. They sat in silence for a while, both lost in thought. Finally, Elena said quietly, I think it's time I start teaching others to teach. The center is growing so much, and there are children waiting in other towns too. That's a beautiful idea, Leonard said. You'll plant new seeds everywhere. And you? She asked. What will you do next? He smiled. Maybe I'll write again. But this time not for fame, for the joy of creating. She nodded approvingly. That's the best reason of all. Over the next few months, Elena began training new teachers at the center, passing down not just techniques but her philosophy, patience, kindness, and the belief that music lives inside everyone. Leonard started writing again, composing gentle pieces inspired by his visits to the center. One of his songs, titled The Modest Virtuoso, became widely loved, but he never talked about where it came from. Those who knew didn't need to ask. Years later, when Elena finally retired, the town held a celebration in her honor. Former students from all over came back. Some were now music teachers, others performers, some even parents of new students at the same center. As she looked at all the familiar faces, her heart filled with gratitude. She didn't see fame or fortune. She saw lives touched, hearts opened, and dreams sparked by something as simple as sound. During the ceremony, Leonard stood up to speak. His voice was steady but full of emotion. When I first met Elena, he said, I thought music was a competition. I thought the louder and faster I played, the greater I was. But she showed me something different. She showed me that music isn't about winning, it's about giving. The crowd applauded softly. Elena's eyes glistened as she smiled at him. After the speeches, the children performed a special song they had prepared just for her. It was one of her old melodies, the same one she used to play in the mornings when she opened the windows of the center. Hearing it played by so many young hands filled her eyes with tears. When the song ended, the audience stood, applauding not just for her talent, but for the love she had shared with everyone who ever walked into her world. That night, after everyone left, she sat alone at the piano one last time. The moonlight fell across the keys and the air was still. She played softly, her hands slow but steady. Every note carried years of memories of fear, discovery, laughter, friendship, and peace. And when she reached the last note, she let it linger in the air, then smiled. "Thank you," she whispered, to the music, to her mentor, to the children, to Leonard, and to life itself. Outside, the night was calm. A soft wind moved through the trees, carrying the faint echo of her final melody across the town. It drifted through open windows, across quiet streets, into the hearts of those who had once been touched by her teaching. And though Alina's hands eventually grew too tired to play, her music never faded. It lived on, in the laughter of children, in the kindness of her students, and in every soul that had learned from her that true music doesn't come from the hands. It comes from the heart.